Now, without wanting to totally ruin the beautiful vibe and atmosphere we've created this evening, let me start by telling you one of the things that I find most annoying about Christmas. And I'm sure lots of you are there with me. It's this. Untangling just the wretched ball of fairy lights when I get them out the decorations box, because every December, without fail, you get the box down from the loft and the Christmas decorations out, and these lights, despite having rolled them lovingly up in January in a neat little package, they come out looking like a Cub Scout has used them to learn how to tie knots. And it's baffling and really annoying, especially as you get these decorations out. And this is meant to be the moment when you're getting into the festive spirit and you're decorating the tree. But I'm just finding myself getting more and more hacked off by these annoying spider web of lights that probably won't work anyway when I plug them in, because one of the minuscule bulbs is broken and the whole thing is driving me crazy. Anyway, yet, despite my frustration with the lights, I persist, or I get my much more patient wife to take over. And we keep going with this because it's totally worth it, because Christmas just isn't really Christmas without the twinkly lights. I'd imagine that most of us, if not all of us, have got some Christmas lights up somewhere in the house in some shape or form, maybe on the tree or maybe around the door or the window, or maybe some of us have just gone big. There are some pretty sizable displays that I see driving through Coombe Down, including that huge inflatable glow-in-the-dark Grinch. If that's you and you're here, fair play, that's a good effort. I found some even bigger ones online this week, people who are seemingly trying to redefine the meaning of Christmas lights. In West Lothian, up in Scotland, Gary and Anna Gray spend the entire year preparing to light up their home with 24,000 Christmas lights, which is all linked up to Gary's laptop. He controls the light display, he syncs it with background music. People travel from all over Scotland to see this thing. That's not a bad effort. And you think that's big, and then you find out what happens in America, and obviously they just go bigger and brighter. So Tim and Grace Gay from New York actually hold the Guinness World Record for most lights on a residential property. Last Christmas they displayed more than 720,000 programmed lights on their house and front garden. It takes their whole family 3 months to set the display up, which has 40 miles of lights and 8 miles of extension cords. And 100,000 people apparently come and see this huge light display every year. And I'm pretty sure it's incredible. Unless you're their neighbors, that must just be an absolute nightmare. But the reality is, whether you're a kind of modest minimalist when it comes to Christmas lights, or whether you're a 720,000 bulb, 8-mile extension lead kind of person, all of us get that one of the joys of Christmas is the light. Imagine a Christmas high street without the Christmas lights up. Imagine a Christmas tree without the fairy lights on. Imagine a carols by candlelight service with no candlelight. It wouldn't feel right. And it's because, at its heart, Christmas is all about light in the darkness. And so for the rest of our brief time this evening, I just want to show you why Christmas is about light, and why it's about a light that shines a whole lot brighter than the fairy lights on your house. In fact, it's a light that can shine and brighten up your darkness, even in the gloom of January, when you take the LEDs down. And in fact, that's where we have to start. That we live in a world that is dark. If you spend too long looking at your news feed, you feel it. You feel just the darkness that's everywhere, whether it's horrific underground torture chambers being discovered in Syria, or sexual abuse and violence, or never-ending wars in the cold of Eastern Europe and the humidity of Southeast Asia and the searing heat of Central Africa, or whether it's just a general culture of hatred and sadness and misery in the world around us and online. There's a reason why they call it doom scrolling. And let's be real, the Christmas season can only go so far to alleviate that sense of darkness. It maybe allows for some kind of fleeting escapism as we watch the Gavin and Stacey Christmas special, but we're not fools. It doesn't actually make the darkness go away. And here's the thing, this feeling of darkness, it's not just out there as we read our news feeds out in the world around us, it's in here too. Because darkness lurks inside all of us. Each of us are going to be carrying things this Christmas which in their own way will make it feel like, in some measure, we're living in darkness. Relational darkness, maybe just underlying tensions around the dinner table on Christmas Day, a cloud that hovers over proceedings, just a general sense that all is not well. Moral darkness, there are things that we do or we think about that we're ashamed of, that we want to keep hidden, that we want to keep in the dark, and there's this lurking anxiety that maybe someone's going to find out. Or spiritual darkness, just this unsatisfied wrestling with the big questions of life. Why am I here? What is the point of life? Is there any meaning to this? Is there a God? And then even if you think, your relationships are all rosy at the moment and you don't feel any guilt or shame about anything right now, and you're not facing up to big existential questions, we all face the darkness of knowing that one day we will have to face death. Thanks Danny, we live in death's shadow. I'm going to let him deal with that. For some of us this evening, just while Danny does that will be very real. That we live in death's shadow. For others of us here, we've not really thought about it. But we all live in the shadowlands. If I can say this, in 100 years' time, none of us will be here anymore. And no amount of fairy lights or candles is going to change that. And at this point, if you're wondering how this has taken such a gloomy turn, this carol service, stay with me. It gets better, because in this world of darkness, we long for some light, because light brings safety, it brings health, it brings life. Think of every good versus evil film you've ever watched, okay? Nothing good ever happens in the dark, does it? It's when the light arrives that things start looking up. If you know Lord of the Rings, think about the scene where Gandalf arrives at the top of Helm's Deep, and he then charges down the side of the hill, and the light is shining brightly, and it's just banishing the darkness. At just an everyday level, it's Alfie, my 4-year-old son, who sat over there, who wakes me up in the night to tell me that his night light needs charging up, and it's gotten too dark in his room. And as soon as I plug that light in his mind, he's safe, he's okay. It's Coldplay singing, "Those Christmas lights light up the street down where the sea and city meet. May all your troubles soon be gone. Christmas lights keep shining on," because there's this longing for something to light up the darkness that we find ourselves in. And so the question that we surely must have is, how do we get some light in a world that is full of darkness, and in our own lives that live in that shadow? Where do we find light? And significantly, where do we find a light that lasts? Where do we find a light that can actually deal with the sort of darkness that we were describing a moment ago? Well, before I take you to where the true light can be found, I've got to tell you more about the darkness, because in order to understand where we can find light, we have to see the darkness that we're in the first place. Here is the problem we all face. The darkness that we experience in different ways and that we see in the world around us, the Bible speaks into that and helps us to understand that the ultimate reason for that darkness is that we have shut God out. It's like this. Allow me a crass illustration. Here's one of my kids' Playmobil characters. He's made an appearance before in a church illustration. I'm bringing him back. Go with me. The Bible describes how we were made by the Creator God to live in relationship with Him, since God is light, in the light. There is no evil or wickedness or sadness or death in knowing God, because He is life. And we were made to know Him and be known by Him, enjoying the light of life. So to carry on this budget illustration, it's like this, okay? We're made to live in the light of life. That's the design plan. But here's the problem. Ever since the very beginning, we've rejected that. By nature, we choose to say no to God. We choose to reject Him and the light, and we choose to live in the darkness. And actually, we choose to shut Him out. And so the light is still there. The light hasn't gone anywhere. God hasn't gone anywhere. We've just chosen to cut ourselves off and live in the dark. And it's a really serious problem, because the Bible says that living in darkness is going to lead to lasting death. We've chosen this darkness, and one day that's all we're going to know. And this is a major problem for everyone who's ever lived. Everyone is cut off from God. We're living in darkness, and we consequently face death. And the thing is, we can't do anything about it because we're part of the darkness. Only God, who is truly light, can solve our darkness problem. And this is why life feels hard, and it feels sad, and it feels frustrating for so much of the time. It's why it feels like we're living in a world shrouded in darkness, because we are living in a world shrouded in darkness. It's why we feel this longing for light, because that's what we were made for. But all is not lost, because if we will listen, then we will realize that the promise of Christmas is that God, the light, has broken into our darkness. And it doesn't just happen without prior warning. The coming of God, the light, into our dark world was something that God had promised for centuries before that first Christmas. Did you hear it in some of the readings that we heard earlier? Isaiah 9, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. And then John 1, hundreds of years later, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. And we hear those verses read, and maybe we hear them every Christmas if we're a carol service regular, and we like them because they sound hopeful, and it kind of gives us all the feels while we're sat there holding a candle and the promise of Christmas time is round the corner. But those words of the light coming into the darkness were not written so that people would have something to read at a carols by candlelight service 2,000 years later. They were pointing towards something. Or they were pointing towards someone, rather, because just a few years later, a person called Jesus, a real man from history, not a myth or a legend, a real person called Jesus, rocks up on the scene in Jerusalem and says something extraordinary. Now, before we think about what he says, let me set the scene. The place is Jerusalem. It's the year 30 AD. There's this huge festival going on for the Jewish people. There's loads of feasting, partying. If you were a Jew, it was the place to be. It was kind of like Christmas here. There was loads of hype, loads of excitement. And the big high point of this festival was that in the evenings, these huge lamps would be lit by the temple. They were giant torches, a bit like what is soon going to become a giant torch on the stage. And people, thanks Luke, people would dance around the city with candles in a jar, and light flooded the city, a bit like it does the room tonight. And this festival's going on. And in this true story, we get to the last evening. Now, the last evening in the festival is always the best and the most exciting bit. It's a bit like Christmas Eve. So imagine it. The lights are burning brightly like this, and the candles are going, and the torches are shining, and light floods the place, much like this evening. And then someone named Jesus stands right where these big torches are burning, and he says in a loud voice, and you can see the words in your booklet, he says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Now that is totally extraordinary, because in the middle of this giant light party, Jesus announces to the world that he is the true light, that he is the light that the world has been waiting for, that he is the one God has promised, that he is the one sent by God to bring people out of darkness. And that simply is the staggering news we celebrate at Christmas. That though we live in darkness and we are utterly helpless to do anything about it, God sends his son Jesus as the light into our dark worlds. Jesus, fully God, comes to bring us out of our darkness by showing us who God is and how we can be restored to him. Because in Jesus and him alone, God has been revealed. The light has come. If you've got your booklets, have a look down at that verse in John chapter 1. Just want you to look at it. Can you see what Jesus says? Chapter 8, verse 12. Jesus says, "I am the light of the world," which means no one else, because only Jesus smashes the power of darkness and reveals God to us. If there's going to be a light in the world, Jesus is saying, it's me. It's Jesus or darkness. No one or nothing else can bring us out of that. Not the Pope, not Allah, not Buddha, not any other philosophical or religious system. With everything else, we remain in the darkness. Jesus alone is the light who reveals God, and as such, we all need him. He's not an optional extra. Jesus turns up on the scene of history and announces this phenomenal promise that whoever follows him will never walk in darkness. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean that if you follow Jesus, you'll never walk in darkness? Does that mean that if we trust Jesus, life just becomes this Technicolor Disney film? Well, not quite, at least not yet. At its simplest, most fundamental level, it means we are not in spiritual darkness anymore. Jesus' arrival means that we can know God and be known by him in a way we could never before. Following Jesus means being brought from spiritual darkness to spiritual light. It means having our eyes open to see who we really are and what God is really like and how we can know him. It means the total joy and assurance of being known and loved by God, the one who made you. That's living in the light. But it's not merely spiritual light. Following Jesus means being brought into moral light. All of the shameful stuff that we have just hidden deep down, it is forgiven, it is cleansed by the light of Jesus. We don't have to hide anymore. And it also means that death's shadow no longer haunts us, because the promise for all who trust in him is that heaven awaits, paradise awaits, where there's going to be no more evil, where there's going to be no more wickedness or pain or grief or hurting or shame, and crucially, no more death. All those things will have gone, and we're just going to live in the light of God's life forever. And you see, knowing that makes all the difference now. This is a light that makes a difference, not just on the 15th of December when you're feeling all Christmassy at a carol service, but on the third Monday in January, which is apparently the most depressing day of the year. This promised light goes way beyond the tangled fairy lights, all the way through New Year's and forever. And by the way, this is why Christians sing, even when the darkness feels heavy. For some members of our church family now, life feels dark. They are limping through the valley of the shadow of death. If you're new to church things, let me encourage you, please, this evening, to come to church on a Sunday in January. The rest of the world has the blues right about then. Come along here in January and watch ordinary people who are limping through life and just watch them sing. Watch them smile. And that is not because they are naive to their pain or the world around them, but it is because they enjoy the permanent billion megawatt glow of living life in the light of Jesus, the light of the world. Now, this might sound too good to be true, but let's not miss the important thing Jesus includes here. He doesn't say, I'm the light of the world, no one will ever walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. He says, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, because being brought into the light is conditional not on filling in a long form or following a list of requirements, but following Jesus. That is all you have to do to be in the light, is to follow him, because he is the light. Follow Jesus and you will not walk in darkness anymore, but you will have the light of life. And if that is true, then why would you say no to this call from Jesus to follow him? It's like this. Imagine if you were going walking with friends in the Mendips and you get lost and it's getting dark and you're on your own out in the hills and there's a storm, whatever the next letter is, coming in, and it's pitch black and the wind's getting up. And if you're honest, you're a bit scared and you've got no way of finding a way home and it's getting dangerous. But then all of a sudden, a local farmer appears and he's got his quad bike with his huge spotlights on and he's lighting up the darkness and he's leading the way to safety and he's calling to you and he's saying, hey, follow me. Follow me this way to safety. Let's go. Come with me. You're going to follow him, right? This is what Jesus is saying here, but on a much bigger, eternal scale. He is looking at you and I living in darkness, destined for eternal separation from God, and he's saying, follow me, and you won't live in darkness anymore, but you'll have life. Because Jesus alone can bring light to our darkness as he reveals God to us and shows us the way to him. And so why would we ever say no? And just to be clear, this is our offer for any type of person. Jesus says he's the light of the world. Jesus brings light to people in darkness all over the planet and throughout history. And he says it's for whoever follows him, which means that it's not just for religious types. I don't know what your job is or what you do or what your life consists of as you're sat here, whether you're unemployed or you're a student, or you're a stay-at-home mum, or you're a plumber or a technician or pig farmer or whatever it is. However old you are, whether you're 5 or 105, whether you feel like you've done lots of good things or you've been in prison for assault. Jesus makes zero qualification. However old you are, whatever you've done, wherever you're from, whoever follows him will not walk in darkness anymore. And that is a promise, and it's a promise and the story of lots of people here this evening. And you can say yes to following Jesus even tonight and come out of darkness and into the light. And that's the glorious, mind-blowing news we celebrate at Christmas. And there are lots of questions you should have off the back of this. Okay, for example, how does Jesus bring us out of darkness? What does it mean to follow him? Those are great questions. I'll say more a bit later about how you can go about finding some answers to those. But for now, as you enjoy the Christmas tree lights that you spent 15 hours untangling, or you take the kids to see the house down the street that has the kind of full package Christmas light show experience, or you just enjoy walking through our city with all its festive lights, remember this. Remember that the true light has come into the world. His name is Jesus, and he has come to bring you, yes, even you, out of darkness and into the light of life. Let me pray, and then we'll stand and we're going to sing our final carol together. Loving Father in heaven, we thank you so much that though we were in darkness, you sent your Son, Jesus, to be the light of the world. Father, we are sorry where we turn from you and we choose to live in darkness and not in your light. We thank you that you sent Jesus to be the light that we desperately need, that we might know you and be known by you. And so we ask, please, that you might help us to follow Jesus and enjoy the huge blessing of living in the light of his life. And so we pray these things in his precious name. Amen.